For 9 weeks straight, the Chinese guns worked our hill from dusk to dawn, every night but 1 hour. Every night, at exactly midnight, the shooting stopped. All of it, at once, like a thrown switch. And every man on that hill thanked God for that hour, right up until the night we learned why we'd been given it. Every long war develops its own quiet customs. Soldiers who would kill each other at first light will, by some unspoken arrangement, leave one another be at the cook-fire hour, or hold their fire while the wounded are carried in. In the trenches of the First World War, they called it live and let live, a private peace the generals never authorized and could never quite stamp out. Two armies pinned a stone's throw apart for months on end learn each other's rhythms the way you learn the breathing of someone asleep in the next room. They learn when the other side eats, when it sleeps, when it is most afraid. And sometimes a front falls into a silence that feels almost like mercy. But mercy has to come from someone. And the thing about a silence is that it never tells you who is keeping it or why. A man can spend a long time being grateful for a gift before he thinks to ask who left it on his doorstep. And longer still before it occurs to him that some gifts aren't given at all, that some are left as a warning. What follows was sent to us by a viewer who asked to be known only by her handle. She wrote that her grandfather, she calls him Earl, came home from Korea in 1953 and spoke of almost none of it for 50 years. Near the end of his life, when the words finally came, his family recorded them. She sent us the transcript after he passed. We've changed the names of the men and the number of the hill. We've changed nothing else. Earl was a rifleman that winter, holding a combat outpost forward of the main line of resistance on the central front where the war had stopped moving and simply ground itself in place. This is what he said happened up there. This is what the enemy was running from at midnight on a hill with no name worth keeping. The shelling had been steady since dark, the flat crack of a recoilless gun, the long stitch of a burp gun walking the wire. Ski had his cheek down on the firing step and his rifle pointed at nothing he could see. "How long does this go?" he said. "All night." DeLacy didn't look over. "Every night." "All watch your sector." A round walked close enough to throw grit. Ski flinched into the frozen wall. He started to say something, and DeLacy lifted one gloved hand. "Wait." And then the hill went quiet. Not slack, not a lull. The fire stopped the way a faucet stops, between one heartbeat and the next, and the silence that dropped in behind it was so complete that Ski could hear the snow landing on his own helmet. He lifted his head. "What's down?" DeLacy's hand was on the back of his neck. Not rough, firm. His voice had gone flat and very low. "Down. Don't stand up. Don't call out. And whatever you hear out there in the next while, you do not look to see what it is." Is it a truce? Did somebody call a nobody called anything? DeLacy was already settling against the trench wall, rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the middle distance, and not, Ski noticed, on the enemy line at all. Midnight's theirs. We just live here the rest of the day. You'll learn it. The ones who learn it go home. Out past the wire, down in the dark of the draw, something moved that was too heavy to be the wind. Ski put his face against the cold dirt and kept it there, in Earl's own words. They trucked us up to the line in November, and by the time I got to the outpost, the ground was already iron. We were on a hill the maps knew by a number, sitting 600 yards forward of the main line, out there on our own like a tooth somebody forgot to pull. Behind us, our own people. In front of us, and on both flanks, theirs. The Chinese held the high ground across a saddle, close enough that on a still day you could hear them coughing. The position was bunkers and trenches dug into the reverse slope, firing steps cut into the forward face, and wire, Belts of it, concertina and tanglefoot, strung down to the dead ground at the bottom. A draw came up the left, a kind of cut in the hill, and that was the bad ground, the avenue, the place they'd come from if they came. We kept a listening post down near the mouth of it, 2 men in a hole with a sound-powered phone, whose whole job was to lie in the dark and tell us when the world started moving. The shelling started every evening like a shift change. Mortars first, then the recoilless guns, then the long machine gun bursts working back and forth across our wire to keep our heads down and our wiring parties honest. It went on for hours. You learned to eat through it, sleep through it, write a letter through it. The cold was worse than the guns. The cold was a living thing that winter. It got into the rifle bolts and the radios and your own joints, and it never once let up. And then, the first night, around midnight, it all stopped. I remember it because I thought I'd been hit. That's the only way I can describe what the silence felt like. Like a concussion. Like something had gone wrong with my own ears. One second the hill was all noise, and the next it was nothing. Just the snow coming down, and the older men around me not moving, not talking, easing down low with their faces turned out toward the draw. I figured it was a Chinese thing. That's what all of us new men figured. We had our ideas. Somebody said they stopped to eat. Somebody said it was a rotation, the night shift coming on. Somebody who'd read a little said it was political, that they pulled the men back for an hour of lectures, indoctrination, whatever it was they did over there. It didn't much matter what we believed. What mattered was that for 1 hour the hill belonged to us. And a hill that has been trying to kill you all night is a wonderful thing to suddenly own. So we used it. Of course we used it. We ran ammunition up from the rear during the quiet. We dragged the wounded down. We sent wiring parties out to mend the belts the machine guns had cut, because midnight was the only hour nobody was shooting at them. It was the safe hour. The whole outpost ran on it. We'd sweat out the shelling all night, just waiting for that switch to throw so we could get our work done. It was 3 weeks before anything went wrong, and when it did, it went wrong quiet. The listening post called it in first. The 2 men down at the mouth of the draw, good men, steady, got on the phone about 10 minutes after the firing stopped and said there was movement in the cut below them. Heavy movement, coming up. We went to 100% and braced for the assault, because that's what movement in the draw meant. It meant they were coming. And the lieutenant we had then got on the company net to call for illumination. And the LP came back on the phone and said, real low, don't put up a flare. And then they said the movement wasn't coming from the Chinese side. And then the phone just hissed. We didn't fire. I want to be clear about that, because later it mattered. We didn't put up the star shell, and we didn't open up, because the 2 men in that hole had told us not to, and there was something in how they'd said it. So we lay there in the cold and listened to whatever it was come up the draw and pass along below our wire. Slow and heavy and wrong. A sound with a weight to it I have never been able to describe to anybody, and have never wanted to. And then go on past, up the hill, and over the saddle toward their side. The night stayed silent until almost 1. Then the guns started up again like nothing had happened. When we got down to the listening post at first light, both men were gone. No blood, no sign of a struggle. Their weapons were there, and the phone was there, off the hook. And they were not. We never found them. The report said missing, presumed captured, and maybe that's all it was. But the Chinese never paraded them, never traded them, and never, in any of the broadcasts they used to pipe at us over the loudspeakers, mentioned them at all. 2 men, off a hill, into nothing, during the 1 hour both armies had stopped trying to kill each other. There was one more. A wiring party a few nights later. 3 men out at the belts during the quiet, and only 2 came back when the hour ended. We wrote the third off the same way. And then, 4 nights after that, he walked up the draw on his own 2 feet in the middle of the midnight silence, and our LP nearly shot him before they saw the uniform. He came up through the wire and into the trench, and he was wrong. Not hurt anywhere you could see. He just wasn't all there behind the eyes, and he wouldn't say where he'd been. Not to us, not to the medics, not to the chaplain. The only thing he ever said about it, and he said it more than once, low, like a man saying grace, was, "Don't go looking. When it's quiet, don't go looking to see why." They took him off the line. I don't know what became of him. After that, the rule on our hill wasn't a guess anymore, and it wasn't a Chinese thing. It was ours, hard learned, passed man to man the way you pass anything that keeps you alive. When the firing stops at midnight, you get low and you go dark and you go silent. You do not move and you do not look. You let the hour pass over you and you wait for the guns. The men who could do that went home. That was the whole of it. We took a prisoner in late January on a daylight raid across the saddle. A young soldier, half starved, both hands gone gray with frostbite. They brought him back to the outpost to hold until he could go to the rear. We had an interpreter, a Korean attached to the company, and the prisoner wouldn't talk, wouldn't give us anything until he'd asked one thing first. He asked it twice before the interpreter would translate it, because the interpreter didn't like it. He asked, "Do you also stop at midnight?" And when we told him yes, your side stops too, every night, the boy put his ruined hands over his face and he wept. And then he talked. He told us their officers had a standing order for that stretch of line. No man was to fire his weapon, and no man was to leave his position between the midnight hour and 1. The order carried no explanation because everyone who'd been up there long enough already understood it. He told us they'd lost men too, men who'd broken the rule, fired at a noise, gone out to relieve themselves, and were simply not there in the morning. He had a word for the thing. The interpreter chewed on it a while and finally just said, "It doesn't come over right." The closest he could get was the one that walks the cut, the thing that owns the dark between. And then the prisoner said the part I've carried 60 years. He said, through the interpreter, looking at us, "You and me, we are not enemies." He said we were the same kind of animal, both armies lying still in the cold, holding our breath for 1 hour every night, not for each other, hiding the both of us from the same thing. The new lieutenant came up in February, replacement officer, fresh, sharp creases, the kind they sent forward to make a name. He read the outpost log, and he read about our midnight quiet, and he did not see in it what we saw. He saw an unauthorized ceasefire. He saw men who'd gone soft and gotten friendly with the enemy across a piece of dark. To him, it was a discipline problem, and worse, it was a thing the enemy had taught us. And he was not going to be the officer who let his platoon take instruction from the Chinese. He told us at the evening briefing how it was going to be. At 15 minutes past midnight, when the line went quiet, the section gun, our .30 caliber down on the left covering the draw, would open up on the enemy positions across the saddle. Harassing fire. Reminding them, he said, that this hill belonged to the United States Army around the clock. Every man who'd been up there more than a month tried to talk him out of it. DeLacy tried. The platoon sergeant tried. We didn't tell him about ghosts. You couldn't, not to a man like that. You'd have been on the next truck to the rear with your sanity in question. We told him the parts he might believe, that we'd lost men in the quiet, that the listening posts heard things, that whatever the reason was, both sides held that hour, and there had to be a reason both sides held it. He heard cowardice. He heard exactly what he'd decided to hear before he ever came up the hill. At midnight, the guns stopped. We got down. We always got down. And down on the left, I could see the gun crew at the .30 not getting down because they'd been ordered. 3 men hunched over the weapon, waiting on the second hand, and the lieutenant standing behind them in the open with his watch up in the starlight. At 15 past, he gave the word, and the gun opened up. I have never heard anything as loud as that gun in that silence. The muzzle flash strobed the whole left of the hill, white, again and again, tracers reaching out across the saddle. For about 4 seconds, it was just a machine gun firing into the dark, like 1,000 nights before it. Then the draw answered. Not gunfire. I need you to understand there was no gunfire from down there. There was a sound. I won't try to make the sound for you. And it was coming up the cut, fast. Faster than the heavy, slow thing we'd listened to all those nights. Faster than anything that size had any business moving. And it was coming for the light, for the gun, for the noise. The gun stopped. It didn't run out of belt. It stopped between one round and the next. One of the men at it screamed, just once, and then there wasn't any more screaming, and the flash was gone, and the left of the hill was dark again. I did the only thing I knew how to do. I got flat in the bottom of the trench, face into frozen dirt, hands over the back of my head. I did not move. I did not make one sound. And when it came up over the lip of the trench, when I felt the cold of it pass over me, a cold that was different from the winter, a cold with an attention in it, I did not look. I kept my eyes shut and my face down, and I thought about my mother's kitchen, and I did not look. It stood over me. I know it stood over me. And then the weight of it moved on, up the hill, over the saddle, toward their side, and the silence closed back up behind it. The gun started again a little before 1. When it got light, we went down the left. The gun was there, twisted on its tripod, the barrel bent in a way that no man and no shell fire I ever saw could bend a barrel. The 3 men of the crew were not there. The lieutenant was not there. There was no blood on any of it. There never was. And the Chinese, across the saddle, did not fire a shot all that next day. Not one. I have always believed they were doing what we were doing. Lying low, keeping quiet. 2 beaten armies on 2 halves of a dead hill, both of us shamed and frightened by what one foolish man had called up out of the ground between us. We held that outpost another 6 weeks. Then they pulled us off it, and the report that came down said the position was abandoned under untenable enemy pressure. That's the official history. The enemy had nearly stopped firing at us by then. That isn't what we were running from. Earl came home in the spring of 1953. He married, raised 3 children, worked 40 years, and almost never spoke of the war. But his family says there was one thing about him they never understood until the end. That midnight was the bad hour. Always. Every night of his life. That he would not be caught standing or talking when a clock rolled over to 12, if he could help it. And that on the nights he forgot himself, or the nights a sudden quiet came over the house, he would wake them all with a sound that none of them ever forgot. He kept his rule to the last. Do not stand. Do not call out. Do not look. His granddaughter wrote that he died in his sleep, in the small hours, peacefully, the family was told. She did not say what time. Perhaps she didn't know. Perhaps she did, and decided some things are kinder left unsaid. 2 armies once spent a winter on a nameless hill, killing each other from dusk to dark, and agreeing on exactly one thing, without ever speaking a word of it across the wire. They agreed about the hour of midnight, not because they were merciful, not because they were tired, but because they had both met the thing that owned the dark between them, and they had both, in their separate languages, learned the same small prayer. When the shooting stops all at once, do not look to see why. On every blueprint, the bunker ended at sub-level 4. Our engineer found a stairwell that went lower, a sealed level that wasn't on a single plan in the building. We had orders to inventory the place and strike it from the record. We never reported what was waiting on level 5. There is an architecture under Europe that was never meant to be seen. For 40 years, 2 alliances dug downward. They built hardened command posts and relay nodes and communications vaults into hillsides and under farmland, behind blast doors rated to survive a near miss from a nuclear weapon. Many of these sites were drawn carefully onto classified plans. A smaller number were drawn onto nothing at all. They were funded quietly, built quietly, and left off the public record on purpose, because the entire value of a fallback command site is that the other side cannot find it on a map. We tend to think of secrecy as a thing you do to information, a stamp, a safe, a clearance. But secrecy is also a thing you do to places. You can build a room and then spend a great deal of effort making sure that room does not exist on paper. No survey, no utility plan, no line on the county map. And if you do that work well enough, for long enough, a strange thing happens. The place becomes real only to the people standing inside it. The men who staff these sites live by orders that have a particular weight to them. The order to hold, to occupy a position and maintain it until you are relieved. It is one of the oldest instructions in soldiering, and it contains a quiet assumption that we rarely examine, that relief will come. That someone, somewhere, is keeping a list with your name on it, and that when the crisis passes, that someone will remember to send word. Usually, they do. What follows is an account of one of the times the word never came, and of what 30 years of waiting does to men who were never taken off a list, in a place that was never put on a map. The detail involved was a property disposal team sent in the winter of 1992 to close a site that officially had 4 levels. It had 5. The senior man on that detail agreed to talk to us. We'll use his last name only, Della Rocca, a retired sergeant first class. A second man on the team, a combat engineer, corroborated the parts of this that can be corroborated. The rest, by design, cannot be. That is the part that should bother you. The Army was leaving Germany in those years, and leaving fast. Whole installations were being inventoried, signed over, and abandoned to the German government in the space of an afternoon. Facility H7, the closure detail called it the Cardinal Site, was small and unglamorous and near the bottom of someone's list. A hardened relay and communications vault sunk into a hill, locked since the early 60s. The detail's job was simple. Count what was inside, photograph it, list it on a hand receipt, then seal the place and strike it from the property book so that the United States Army would no longer have to admit it owned a hole in a German hill. The orders came on a single sheet. Della Rocca remembers them being 3 lines long. Inventory the site. Seal every level. Report any personnel still present. Read me the third one again, Hardin said. He was the engineer, the one who'd read more building plans than the rest of them put together. Report any personnel still present. Present in what? It's been locked 30 years. That's what it says. Somebody up the chain thinks there's people in there. Della Rocca folded the sheet and put it away. Somebody up the chain copied a form from 1962 and didn't read it. Let's get the door open before we lose the light. The outer blast door took most of an hour and a cutting torch. Behind it, the air came out at them stale and machine cold, the way air does when it has been breathing the same dust for a generation. They worked downward. Sublevel 1, a generator hall, the diesels seized and orange with rust. Sublevel 2, bunks and a mess, mattresses gone to gray powder. Sublevel 3, filing. Sublevel 4, the relay floor proper, racks of equipment the size of refrigerators, dead and silent and beautiful in the way obsolete machines sometimes are. It was on 4 that Harden stopped, with the plan board under one arm and his flashlight on the floor. "Sergeant, there's a stair here." "So?" "There's a stair here, and it goes down, and it is not on the plan." He laid the board flat on a console and put the light across it. The plan ended at 4. There was no 5th level on it. There was no 5th level on any of the 3 different plans rolled up in the filing room on 3. But there was a stairwell in the back corner of the relay floor, concrete, descending, with a steel door at the bottom of it. Above the door, stenciled in white paint that had barely aged, 2 letters and a number that did not belong to any document in the building. The number was not SL5L. It had no number at all, just a single word stenciled by someone, sometime, in a place that no one had drawn. The word was hold. I want to explain how ordinary it was, right up until it wasn't, because that's the part nobody believes. We were bored, understand that. We'd been signing for dead generators and rotten mattresses for 2 days. A door that wasn't on the plan was the most interesting thing that had happened all week, and Harden was treating it like a structural problem, which is what it was to him. He went on about it for a while, said the concrete pour was older than the rest, said the level had probably been built first and the upper floors built on top of it, said somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure it didn't show up on the documentation. He wasn't scared. None of us were. We were curious. That's the honest word. We were curious. The door at the bottom wasn't locked the way the others were. It had a wheel, like a ship's hatch, and it turned. It turned easily. I remember thinking it shouldn't turn that easily after 30 years, and then I remember thinking nothing at all, because it opened, and there was light on the other side of it. Not our light. A low, steady, working light, the kind that comes off equipment that is running. I sent Voss back up to tell Okafor on the radio that we were entering a sub-level and that the power was somehow live. Voss was the youngest, 19, maybe 20. He went up the stair, and I heard him on the net for a second, telling Okafor, and Okafor saying something back, and then I stepped through the hatch and stopped listening to the radio, because I was looking at a room full of men. They were at their posts. There were maybe a dozen of them. They were in fatigues, the old olive drab, the kind my father wore, sateen, faded, sharp creases gone soft. They had rifles I recognized from photographs, the long wooden ones, M14s, racked and stood the way you stand a weapon when you're going to be in a place a while. The room was a relay floor, like the one above, except this one was alive. Dials lit, a reel turning slowly behind glass, a logbook open on a desk under a gooseneck lamp, and the men were doing the small, patient things that men do on a long watch. One was writing. One was at a console with a headset on one ear. One looked up at me when I came through the door, and he wasn't afraid, and he wasn't surprised, and that was the first thing that was wrong, because a man should be one or the other when a stranger steps out of a sealed stairwell. He was glad. He stood up, calm, unhurried, a sergeant by his sleeve, and he said the thing I have heard in my sleep every week for 30 years. He said, "You're the relief." I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Harden was behind me in the hatch, and I heard him say very quietly, "Sergeant, the calendar on that wall." There was a calendar on the wall. It was open to October. The year on it was 1962. The sergeant saw us looking, and he misread it the way a tired man misreads everything. "Long shift," he said, almost apologizing. "We've been holding since the alert came down. Few hours now. They told us hold until relieved. Don't stand down till you get the word." He looked at the stair behind us like he expected more of us to come down it. "You bring the word?" "A few hours." That's what he said. A few hours. Hardin asked him, and I'll give Hardin credit, his voice was steady. Hardin asked him what date he had it as, and the sergeant told him. He gave us a day in October of 1962, and he gave it to us the way you give someone the time, with no doubt in it at all. And behind him his men nodded, because they had it as the same day, all of them. A dozen men agreeing on a date that was 30 years in the grave. I have thought about this more than I have thought about anything in my life, and here's the closest I can get to it. They were not ghosts. I want to be clear. They cast shadows. The one who'd been writing had ink on the side of his hand. When the sergeant breathed, I could see it, the same as mine. They were men, and they were warm, and they were exactly as old as they'd been when that door was sealed. And to them, no time had passed at all, because down there, no time was passing. The level was holding them the way it held the air. Nothing in that room had moved on. Not the dust, not the calendar, not the men. They were still in the alert. They were still holding. And they had been holding, by their reckoning, for a few hours, and by the world's reckoning, for 30 years. And the gap between those two numbers was the thing in the room with us. And then Okafor came up on the radio, and that's when I understood what kind of trouble we were in. I heard it too. The sergeant had a handheld. Okafor's voice came through and he sounded wrong. Not scared. Lost. He kept asking who was on the net. We'd been talking to him for 2 days. He knew our names. And he kept saying, "Identify. Who is this? Who's down there?" Like he'd never heard of us. Okafor was topside, in daylight, by the trucks, with the hand receipt on a clipboard in front of him. And he could not remember us. He had the manifest right there, 6 names. And while we stood on that level, he called down, and he read the names off the clipboard to try to sort out who he was talking to. And there were not 6 names anymore. He counted 5. Then he counted them again and got 4. He told me later, when he could tell me anything, that the names didn't smudge and didn't tear. They just stopped being names he recognized, one at a time. Like words you say so many times they turn to noise. He was forgetting us in the order we'd gone down. The deeper and the longer we stood on that level, the more thoroughly the man in the daylight, holding the paper with our names on it, forgot that we existed. That is when I finally got it. That is when the curiosity went out of me all at once, and something else came in. The level wasn't on any map because the level erases. That's what it does. That's what it's for, or what it became. Anyone who holds it stops being on the books. The men in front of us hadn't been hidden by some clerk in 1962. They'd been taken off the world, name by name, the way Okafor was taking us off it right now. Scrubbed from the rosters, dropped from the lists, forgotten by every living soul who'd ever known they went down, until the only record that the lower level existed was the lower level itself, and the only proof these men were real was that they were standing in front of me, still waiting for a relief that could never come, because the army that posted them no longer remembered it had. And we were next. We were already going. Okafor was down to 4 names and falling. I said one word. I said, "Out." We went for the hatch. Hardin first, then me. And the sergeant, God help me, the sergeant didn't grab at us. He didn't beg. He just said in that same patient voice, "You're not the relief." It wasn't a question. Reyes was on the stair. Marin was behind him. Hardin was up and through. I was at the hatch. I turned to count my people the way you do, and I counted. And I want to tell you exactly what I counted, because it is the thing I have never been able to set down. Voss was inside the room. Voss, who I'd sent up the stair. Voss, who'd been on the radio with Okafor in the daylight 100 feet above us. Voss was standing on the lower level, on level hold, next to the man at the console, with a headset half on his ear, and he was looking at the dials, and his face was calm. One of the seated men had stood and was offering him the chair, relieving himself of the watch, handing it on, and Voss was reaching for it. Easy, natural, like he'd always been there, like it had been a few hours. I yelled his name. He looked at me. He looked at me, and there was nothing wrong with his face, and that was the worst part. There was nothing wrong. He just didn't understand why I was shouting, because to him, he'd just come on shift, and the sergeant put a hand on his shoulder, friendly, and said, "We've got him. Go on. Send the relief when you find it." I went back for him. Hardin caught me at the hatch, and Hardin is the only reason I'm telling you this instead of holding a chair on level 5 right now, because he had both arms around me, and he dragged me up the stair backward while I screamed a kid's name into a room that was already behind us, settling back into its few hours long quiet. We got the hatch shut. We got up 4 flights. We came out into the snow in the daylight, and Okafor was standing at the trucks with the clipboard, and he looked at the 5 of us coming out of that hill, and the first thing he said, I'll never forget it, the first thing he said was, "Who are you guys?" He came back to us in about a minute. Our names came back to him the way a word comes back when you stop trying to say it. By the time we were at the trucks, he knew us again, all 5. 5. He never got Voss back. None of them did. I'm the only one who kept him. We did what the orders said. We sealed every level. Hardin set the lower hatch himself, and we filled the stairwell behind it. Not because the order called for it, but because none of us could stand the idea of that wheel turning easily for the next man. We struck the cardinal site from the property book. We signed it over. We drove away. The paperwork came back to us corrected. And I want to be careful here because this is the part that I cannot prove and that you are free to disbelieve. The hand receipt that went up had 6 names on it. The copy that came back had 5. Not crossed out, not redacted, just 5, typed clean, as though 6 had never been entered. There is no specialist Voss in the records of that detail. There is no record of a 5th level at Facility H7. There is, somewhere, a closure report with my statement in it, and a friend who saw the cover sheet years later told me the body of it had been replaced with a single line. Site does not appear on current maps. It is not to be added. For a long time, I thought that line was an order from someone above me, a cover-up, somebody protecting a secret. I don't think that anymore. I think it's a description. I think the level was never hidden by a clerk. I think it was built off the record on purpose by people who understood exactly what they were building, to hold something that must never be written down, and that the men they posted to hold it became part of what it holds. The site does not appear on current maps because appearing on a map is the one thing that level does not allow. It is not a place that was forgotten. It is a place that forgets. And it has been doing the job it was built to do, faithfully, in the dark, under a German hill, since October of 1962. The detachment is still down there. I'm as sure of that as I'm sure of anything. Still at their posts, still warm, still writing in the log, still holding. And by their count, it has been a few hours, and they are still waiting for the relief and the word, and they are patient men, and they will wait. Voss is with them now. 19, maybe 20. Calm, a headset on one ear. There's only one thing left that troubles me at the end, more than the rest of it. We were the relief. We came. 30 years late, by accident, not knowing the word, but we came, and we found them. And for about 4 minutes, the lower level at the Cardinal site was a place where the relief had finally arrived. And then we left, and the records corrected themselves, and the maps stayed blank. So now there is no trace anywhere on any plan or roster or page that anyone ever went down to relieve them at all. As far as the world is concerned, the relief never came. As far as the world is concerned, it never will. "31 of us were on that Firebase. When the relief patrol came through the wire, the stove was still warm, and every rifle was cleaned and racked. And me, locked in the supply room from the inside. They never found the other 30. A fire support base is not really a place. It is a routine. It is 2 or 3 howitzers in a ring of red earth, a fire direction center under sandbags, a strand of concertina wire, a generator, and 30-odd men who keep the whole thing alive by doing the same small things in the same order every day until the order itself becomes a kind of prayer. Stand to at first light, clean the tubes, check the charges, walk the wire, eat in shifts so the line is never empty. Stand to again at dusk, post the guard. In a war with no front and no rear, where the danger could come from any tree line at any hour, that routine was the only thing a man could hold on to. Discipline kept you alive. Everyone knew it. The squared-away Firebase was the one that came home. So this story is difficult because it asks you to consider the opposite. In the spring of 1969, the United States Army built a small fire support base in the central Highlands near the Cambodian border, in a province most of the men could not have found on a map a year earlier. The official designation was a string of letters and numbers. The men called it Ren. They did not build it on open ground. They built it on the terraces of an old French rubber concession, rows of hevea trees gone wild, a tin-roofed bleeding shed collapsing into the vines, and one squat stone building, the overseer's storehouse, still standing on the high ground. The Army liked the high ground and liked the stone walls. They put their ammunition and their rations inside that storehouse and called it the supply room. The plantation had been empty since the first war here, the one the French lost, and the local people, the Jurai, who had tapped those trees for 2 generations, would not go back into the rows. When the engineers needed porters to haul up the gun sections, the Jurai carried the loads to the edge of the old plantation and set them down. They would go no farther. An interpreter pressed one of the older men about it, and the man was not frightened exactly, and he was not vague. He said the garden kept what was given to it. He said his grandfather had tapped those trees, and that the rule of the work had always been the same. You never finished. At the end of the day, you left 1 tree untapped and 1 cup unemptied, always, on purpose, so that the garden would still be waiting for you in the morning and would not decide it was finished with you. The man said the French overseers thought it was laziness and beat them for it. He said the French were always very thorough, and there were no French here anymore. The Americans wrote that down as superstition, which is what you do with a thing you intend to ignore. There is an old idea, older than this war and older than that plantation, that some places do not take a life the way a battle takes a life. They do not break the body. They keep it busy. And the most dangerous thing you can do in a place like that is finish your work. Because a thing that is finished can be put away. Ren was a very well-run Firebase. By every account, The men there did everything right. That is the part that has never let any of them go. By April, the gun section at Wren had settled into the rhythm that a position settles into when nothing has happened for a while. 2 105 howitzers, a fire direction center, a security squad of infantry on loan, a cook, a medic, an RTO, and a battery clerk who kept the paperwork, and every evening posted the guard roster on a sheet of acetate by the FDC. The senior man on the hill was a sergeant first class named Vargas on his second tour, the kind of NCO who walked the wire himself at odd hours because he did not trust anyone to be as bored and as careful as he was. The clerk was a specialist named Daniel Hines, 20 years old, good with a typewriter, which is the only reason the Army had decided he should spend a war on a hill near Cambodia. The wrongness, the men would later agree, did not start with a noise. It started with the count coming out right. It was a small thing. On the 14th, a corporal named Das came down off the gun to chow and asked the cook, a private everyone called Sully, whether the resupply bird had brought the new firing tables, because Das had spent the afternoon copying the old ones by hand, and his wrist was killing him. Sully said he hadn't seen Das all afternoon. Das said that was funny, because the tables were copied, all of them, in his handwriting, sitting on the FDC table where he'd left off, except he hadn't finished them. He remembered not finishing. He remembered deciding to do the rest in the morning. And they were done. Sully told him he was working too hard. Doss laughed it off. It is the kind of thing you laugh off. That night, the guard roster came up one name short, and nobody could say whose. Hines counted twice, 31 men, and the roster covered them all. 2-hour reliefs across the gun crews and the security squad, his own neat check mark going down beside each name as the shifts changed. But standing in the FDC at full dark, looking at the board, he had the feeling, and he could never explain it better than this, that one of the lines belonged to someone who was no longer on the hill. Not dead, not gone over the wire, just no longer counted among the living, even though the line was checked off and the watch was being stood. He went and found Vargas. Vargas walked the wire with him. Every position was manned, every man answered. The claymores were set, clackers laid out, the firing wire intact and looping back unbroken to the holes. Vargas put his hand on a strand of concertina, and it was tight and cold and exactly where it should be. "Wire's good," Vargas said. "Mines are good. Everybody's home." He looked back at the dark shapes of the guns. "Get some sleep, Hines." Hines went back to the board instead. He could not have told you why. PFC Kemp had the radio. At 1900, he sent the evening situation report up to battalion the way he did every night. Negative contact, all secure, nothing to note. And battalion rogered it and told him to keep them advised, and that was the last word anyone at Wren ever sent to anyone. The men ate. The men cleaned their weapons because Vargas wanted clean weapons. The generator ran. The lights, what few there were, burned low and blue. And one at a time, through the small hours, in the order they appeared on Hines's board, the men of Fire Support Base Wren finished what they were doing. A man on the number 2 gun seated the last round of a maintenance check and walked off the pad. A man on the wire finished his relief, was relieved on time by someone, and walked toward his hooch, and did not arrive. Sully banked the stove for the morning, set the rice to hold, and stepped out the back of the cook tent. None of them cried out. None of them ran. Every account that survives describes the same thing, which is the absence of any account at all. No shot, no shout, no struggle. The work got done, and the men who did it were not there in the morning to be thanked for it. Highlands watched the check marks go down the board. He was the clerk. He kept the order. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, he understood, the way you understand a thing in a dream a half second before it becomes unbearable, that the order on the board and the order of the silence were the same order. That the base was not being attacked, it was being completed, and that his own name was 11 lines from the bottom. He stopped making the marks. He tore his own name off the board, the strip of acetate with his line on it, and he put it in his mouth. And then he took it out again because that was insane, and he folded it small and pushed it down into his boot. He picked up nothing. He carried nothing. He did not check the radio, did not check the wire, did not pour the coffee that was sitting there, did not do the one small, useful thing his hands kept wanting to do. He walked, very deliberately doing nothing at all, to the one room on that hill with a door that locked, and he went inside the old French storehouse, and he barred it from within, and he sat down on the cold floor in the dark with his hands flat on his knees, and he made himself into a man with no task. The lights stayed on. The stove stayed warm. The watch, somehow, kept getting stood. When Wren missed its midnight check, Battalion assumed a bad antenna. When it missed the next, they sent a platoon up the trail at first light to re-establish contact and bring the garrison home. The point man that morning goes by his handle now. We'll call him Wade. I'd been point a long time by then. You learn the difference between a quiet that's empty and a quiet that's full. Empty quiet, the birds are wrong, the bugs are wrong, somebody's holding their breath in the trees. This wasn't that. This was the other kind, the full kind. Like walking up on a house where the TV's on and dinner's cooking, and you knock, and nobody comes. We came up through the old rubber rows real slow, expecting to find it overrun, expecting wire cut, bodies, the whole thing. And the wire was fine. That was the first thing that didn't sit right. Concertina tight, no gaps, claymores still facing out, firing wires still hooked up. Nobody crawls in through wire like that and then fixes it behind them. Generators humming, there's a radio squelching to itself in the FDC. And there's this smell, and it took me a second. It's food. Somebody's cooking. I put my hand up and we all just stopped at the wire. And I keyed up to the LT, real quiet, and I said, "The wire's all still here. They're not." The platoon's lieutenant, we'll call him Lieutenant H, came up to the gap and the two of them stood looking into a Firebase that was running perfectly and was completely empty. The stove was lit, there were mess tins out, food in them, still warm enough to eat. The coffee in the pot was hot. Both guns were laid and ready, breeches clean, ammo staged. There was a half-written letter on a cot weighted down with a magazine. There was a paperback open and face down. There was shaving cream drying in a steel mirror. Everywhere I looked, somebody had just been there a minute ago. And everywhere I looked, there was nobody. No blood. I want to be clear about that, because it's the thing nobody believes. No blood, no brass, no graves, no drag marks. No sign anybody fought anything or ran from anything. 30 men don't leave a position like that. 30 men don't leave a position at all, not with the guns up and the wire intact. That's the one thing you do not do. I went to the FDC and there was a guard roster up on the board, and I stood there and I read it, and that's the part I still can't. Every line was checked off. Every relief, all night long, in the same handwriting, neat as you please, right down past the time it could have still been happening. Release checked off at 03, 04, 0500. There was nobody left at 0500. The whole base was already empty, and something, was still checking off the watch. The last line had no time next to it, just a name. And there was one name on that board that was never checked off at all. The clerk's. Highlands. That was when the lieutenant got on the radio and asked Battalion for permission to change the mission. He wanted it reclassified from a rescue to a recovery. Battalion asked him how many KIA he had. He said, none. They asked him how many bodies. He said, none. He said it anyway. He could not have told you why, except that he had walked into a place that had finished with the men who lived there, and a rescue is a thing you do for people who can still be brought back. It was the medic, Doc Pruitt, who found the door. The storehouse was the only solid building on the hill, this old stone thing they used for supply, and the door was shut, and it wouldn't give. We're hollering, we're banging on it, we're thinking maybe somebody's hurt in there, somebody's trapped. And then we realize it's not stuck, it's barred from the inside. Somebody pulled a steel bar across that door from the inside, and they're in there in the dark with 30 empty bunks behind us, and they will not open the door. Wade put his mouse to the gap and said, "We're American, we're the relief, open up." And from inside this voice, real calm, that's what got me, real flat and calm, says, "Are you on the roster? Are you on the roster?" That's what he asks. Not who are you, not is it over. Are you on the roster? It took 3 men and a pry bar to lift the bar off the door because the man inside had wedged it and would not help. Hines tells it himself now. He is an old man. He still leaves one chore undone every night of his life, and he does not sit through anything where they call a roll. I heard him at the door, and I knew it could have been the thing pretending. I'd watched it keep the watch. I figured it could keep a voice, too. So I asked the only question that mattered. Are you on the roster? Because the roster was the thing it could read. The roster was the list of who belonged to that hill and what they were supposed to be doing. If they were on the roster, they weren't real men. They were just more work the garden meant to finish. They weren't on it. I'd torn my own line off, and I'd torn nobody onto it. There was no roster anymore. So I let him open the door. When the bar came off and the light came in, the men of the relief platoon found Specialist Daniel Hines sitting on the stone floor of the old French storehouse, in the dark, his back against the ammunition, his hands flat on his knees. He did not look starved. He did not look hurt. He had been in there one night and part of a morning, and he had the face of a man who had been holding perfectly still for a very long time. The way you hold still when there is something in the room with you that finds you by the fact that you are moving. He looked up at the daylight and at the rifles and at Wade's face, and he did not ask what had happened, and he did not ask if it was over. He asked, "Is it still my turn?" There is no satisfying end to this. There is only what we are left with. The Army's file lists Fire Support Base Wren as abandoned under unclear circumstances in 1969 and lists 30 men as missing in action. Their families were given the word that means we do not have them and we do not have an answer. No remains were ever recovered because there were no remains. There was a hot stove, a clean stand of weapons, a perimeter that was never breached, and a guard roster that finished itself in a dead man's handwriting. The men who walked into that base were told, in writing, to keep it to themselves. Most of them did. They were not the kind of men who needed to be told twice that some things have no place in the record. If the old Uriah man was right, then the thing on that hill never attacked anyone, and that is the worst part. It did not hunt the men of Wren. It hunted their diligence. It took the ones who finished, the rounds seated, the relief stood, the stove banked for a morning that would have no one to cook for. The Americans were thorough. They were proud of being thorough. They left nothing undone on that hill. And a thing that leaves nothing undone is a thing that can be put away. The French had been thorough too, once, in those same rubber rows. There are no French there anymore. Daniel Hines lived because he stopped, because he tore his own name off the list and made himself, for one night, a soldier with no duty, no task, no place in the order of things, nothing to complete, and therefore nothing to file away. In any other story, on any other hill, that would make him the one man who failed. The clerk who abandoned his post while 30 better men stood theirs. He knows that. He has known it for 50 years, and he will tell you, if you sit with him long enough, that he is not sure it saved him at all. Because the roster had his name 11 lines from the bottom, and the night ended before it ever got there. He has never known whether breaking the order spared him, or whether the morning simply came first, and the thing in the rubber rose was merely interrupted, and his line is still up there on a board on a hill near Cambodia, uncrossed, waiting, the one piece of unfinished work in a place that does not like to leave its work undone. That is why, when they pried the door open and the light came in, he did not ask if it was over. He asked if it was still his turn.